Well, thanks, David and Ryan, and thanks, Les and Brianna, for your information. It's so valuable and helpful. My position here and why I'm here is to talk about your constituents, the people that are being impacted by this gambling issue. I've been a clinician for 42 years, licensed clinical therapist, doctorate in counseling. I hate, mentioning what I've been doing, but, part of my work is also education. And so I've been interviewed, Fox News, NBC News, New York Post, Reuters, about these issues. So I'm going to be talking about that and what we know about the science of addiction and how it's affecting people's mental illness. So let's see if we get this working here. All right, so what we hope to do here is to gain a better understanding of the relationship between mental illness and gambling addiction. Talk about what I call the Cubist model that shows this relationship between mental illness and addiction, and then provide more awareness of the science of the addictive brain, what we know about the addictive brain. Because many times when we think about people with mental illness and or addiction, we think of this, right? Someone is weak, they have a character flaw, they're lacking morality, lacking willpower, or that they're a criminal, and that is just not the case. None of those are true when it comes to addiction. So I'm going to be talking about that today. And this is based on people that I see, that I've been seeing for a number of years in the field. And so I just want to talk about some of these things here. So we do notice that there's a high stakes, high risk involved here, that one out of 5 people with a gambling problem also attempt suicide. Here in Ohio, we have about 14 to 15 suicides per 100,000. Nevada, about 20 to 21 per 100,000. I don't think that we are driving ourselves to be a Nevada, right? But as we increase gambling, this is a risk that we're looking at. As access expands in the United States National Problem Gambling Helpline, we saw a 43% increase in calls, 60% increase in texts, 84% increase in chats in 2021. We know since January 1st of 2023, when sports betting became legal, seeing more than 55% increase in the Ohio Problem Gambling Hotline. 96% of individuals with gambling disorders have at least one co-occurring mental health issue: depression, anxiety, trauma, grief, loss. I think we can all understand that if I have those issues in my life, I'm going to try to find any way I can to numb out, to disconnect, to feel different. And it's right here in my pocket, right? I can use that to access that. What is addiction? ASAM, the American Society of Addiction Medicine, came out with a relatively new definition not too long ago. They said addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. Nothing in that statement that says anything about one's character, one's lack of morality, one's lack of willpower, one's personality. It's what we really know about the addicted brain. And dysfunction in these circuits leads to characteristic biological, psychological, and social manifestations. Basically, that says it impacts the entire being of the person. And this is reflected in an individual pathologically pursuing reward and or relief by substance use, drugs and alcohol, and other behaviors. Well, what did ASAM mean by and other behaviors? Well, something that we see all the time now: behavioral addictions or process addiction. Sex and pornography, gaming, gambling, social media, information gathering, spending. See, the brain really doesn't care what it is. It doesn't care if I put it in my vein, in my nose, pour it down my throat, see it with my eyes, or do it with my hands. The same neurochemical processing is happening in the brain, and we'll talk about what that is and how that happens. So what is an addiction? One simple way, the 3 C's and a T. Is there a loss of control? I can't manage the behavior anymore. The second C, compulsion. I can't stop doing it. Probably the most important of the 4, I continue to do it despite the negative consequences. I continue to do it knowing that I could lose my job, I could go to jail, I could lose my marriage, and I do it anyway. That's the essence of addiction. Now in Ohio, we have a special way to remember the 3 C's and a T because it is our first 4 casinos. There we go. Here. Just a handy-dandy way to remember that. Okay. So what can cause an addiction to a substance or behavior like gambling? How is addiction related to mental health? And this is what I call CUBIS. It's an acronym that shows us 5 things. I'm going to briefly talk about this. I will have my email at the end, so if you want more information, just reach out to me. So, the C, chemical. Now, for some people, they have neurochemicals in their brain that impacts them. It's a genetic predisposition. It's a part of their DNA. We see this like with blood pressure, runs in a family. Diabetes runs in a family. We just see the same thing with depression, anxiety, addiction. And when those people who are vulnerable to this have this issue come up, I feel this anxiety. Well, gosh, when I smoke that joint, that high-level THC that's out there now, maybe it brings the anxiety down or maybe it increases, but I'm using a substance to try to regulate my mood. Or let's say I feel depressed. Maybe I go to the casino, I look at porn, I take my son's Adderall, and I'm regulating my mood because of this genetic predisposition that's happening within my brain, right? For some people, not all. Some people have unresolved issues. We know people with addiction, at least 50% of them have trauma in their histories, and some experts say it's even as high as 80%. If I have a lot of work that I do as the addiction director at the Lindner Center in Mason is trauma work, unresolved issues that continue to bubble up. And I don't want to feel that stuff. And whenever it happens, I'm trying to find any way to escape. And the accessibility of that roulette wheel, that gambling, readout that I can access into my phone just makes it so much more accessible. We know how sometimes our distorted beliefs can justify our actions. We can rationalize it, minimize it, deny it. We certainly see this from, organizations that want to promote this, right? Somebody's got to win, might as well be you, right? Can't win if you don't play, right? We remember those sayings, don't we? How those distortions in our belief system can perpetuate that. For many years, I worked with sexual offenders, 17 years, and this was a big piece of their life in justifying their actions by their distorted beliefs. Inability to cope. If you think for a moment of someone who's been a best friend to you, a best friend is there for you 24/7. A best friend is there during good times and in bad, and you can always count on a best friend when you can't count on anyone else, right? Pretty good definition of a best friend. Well, that's the same relationship with gambling. It's there for me 24/7. It's there during good times and in bad. And I can always count, let's say, on that drug or that alcohol or that gambling to do what it promises to do every single time when maybe I can't count on people. And now I have to give up this drug or this behavior to get better. It's been there for me, right? And so that for many people, that's hard to give that up. I've been conditioned that this is the way I cope, this is the way I deal, this is the way I escape. And then that takes us to this next section, which is the stimulus-response relationship. And this is what we know about the addicted brain. So here we have the brain. Up in the front is the prefrontal cortex, sometimes called the executive functioning part of the brain. This is where our rational, logical, ethical, moral, spiritual part of our brain is. Our personality is there. It's the triumph of our development. Right? Separates us from any other species on the planet. And the back part of the brain is the midbrain, made up of the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area. One thing that the midbrain does that's very important is that it reinforces behaviors that are necessary for our survival. And it does that with a very special neurochemical, dopamine. Dopamine gives us pleasure. So if food wasn't pleasurable, we would have died out thousands of years ago. If sex wasn't pleasurable, we would not be here today. So the brain reinforces behaviors necessary for our survival by pairing it with the pleasure chemical dopamine. Some of the latest research around dopamine says it's not only about pleasure, but it's when something is better than usual, out of the ordinary. Accessing a casino while I'm laying in bed in the morning, that's different from going to the casino. Something different, out of the ordinary. So, well, guess what? Drugs, alcohol, gambling, they also trigger dopamine too. So what does that mean? Well, when that dopamine is released from the midbrain and floods the brain and hits that rational, logical, ethical, moral part of our brain, it actually shuts down. It's called hypofrontality, a shutting down of the rational, logical, spiritual part of our brain. The triumph of our development goes offline. That's why people get behind the wheel and drive when they're intoxicated, right? That's why that person spends $75,000 on that one spin, because the rational, logical brain is not online, right? So, well, guess what? Gambling, it triggers that dopamine, one of the major chemicals of that. And when that dopamine is released and floods the brain, it shuts down that rational, logical part. And when that happens, another neurochemical is triggered called glutamate. Glutamate is the most abundant neurochemical in our brain. And glutamate has a lot to do with learning and memory. The glutamate memory chemical tells the brain two things about gambling. It says, number one, don't forget it. And number two, go out and get it. So because of the impact that gambling has on releasing the dopamine, the pleasure chemical, shutting down our rational, logical, ethical, moral part of our brain, releasing the memory chemical that says, don't forget gambling, go out and get gambling, now the brain believes that gambling equals, just like food, survival. Now, wait a minute. I don't need gambling to survive. I don't need alcohol to survive. That's true, right? But the brain thinks we do. And it drives the urges. It drives the cravings. But how have we treated all addictions? We treated it like it was an issue of the prefrontal cortex. It must be an issue of character, a lack of morality, a lack of willpower. Someone is just irresponsible. They're a bad person. And now we know none of that is true. It all starts much earlier in the brain. And this is the science that we know to be true, that even in the 1950s, the American Medical Association saw addiction as a disease. And now we have the science to prove it. So as a treatment provider, there's different things that we do to try to help this. For some people, they need medication to stabilize their mood. Other people need to address their trauma, their grief, their loss, their abandonment, their abuse. Some have distorted beliefs that we have to now get rational thinking back in their brain. Remember, this part is not working, so the rational brain is offline. Inability to cope, finding new ways of coping. Not taking out my phone and coping with that. You know, when I work with young men who come in because of their debt due to sports betting, they all were sports enthusiasts, and now every one of them tell me without a doubt they have no interest in the sport, no interest in their teams. It's all about the spread. It's all about the odds. They have lost that totally. That desire is gone. And when we talk about the devastation of finances, you know, other speakers have mentioned this too, the number one issue for divorce is not infidelity, it's financial. Think about losing my retirement, my mortgage, my kids' college fund, how devastating that does to the family system, to the family unit, right? And then the stimulus response, just the education, the awareness that's happening in the brain, that it's not about someone's badness or irresponsible behavior. We know that this to be true about what's going on in the brain. You know, if you go to the Ohio Lottery website, there's a page that says, play responsibly. Like it's putting all the ownership on you to play responsible when there's all this other stuff that's going on in the background that's driving this, right? So, in preparation for tonight, I asked one of my patients who's in the process of recovering from his gambling addiction. I asked, what's one thing that you can tell our group tonight? And this is what he said. I was on a high, a rush, better than cocaine, better than sex, better than being there when my son was born. I didn't care about how much I won or lost. I just wanted to stay at the table. So here's the other thing. My client, he plays blackjack, 21. This won't make sense to a lot of people, but to problem gamblers it will. He's got 21. He asked the dealer, "Give me another card." Now I've got a 17. Do I hold? Do I take another card? That's what I want. I want to stay in that moment. Stay in that moment. With sports betting, the rate of reinforcement, the rate of betting is staying in that moment constantly, right? You can bet on everything. The length of the national anthem, right? I heard someone made a bet about on a certain speech that Trump gave last week. They put down a bet on if he would say fake news. You can bet on anything that's out there, right? Right. So I want to talk about this one last study. I find this really interesting. Habib and Dixon. What they did here, this is called the near-miss effect. Some of you may be aware of that. So what they did, they took two groups of gamblers, social gamblers, like maybe most of us, right, and problem gamblers. They put them through a PET scan, a positron emission tomography. And inside the PET scan, they had a video readout of a slot machine with three outcomes: a 777, a win, a one time where nothing lined up, and then a third outcome where it was a near miss, a 7-7, and a bar. When there was a win, increased activity in both groups. We won. When there was a loss, decreased activity in both groups. The difference, though, was the near miss. For the social gamblers, a near miss is still what? A loss, no activity. But for the problem gamblers, their brain responded almost as high as if they were winning. There is a change in the makeup of the brain, the neurological makeup of the brain of these problem gamblers. When they see that near miss, and I believe this is the case when we have, at least with scratch-offs, higher percentages of near misses for that reason. Maybe they won't tell you that, right? Maybe they feel it's a way to entice the game. But nevertheless, it tricks the person in thinking, I almost won. I'm almost there. So in just summarizing this, I see the devastation that this is happening with the people that I work with and the people that you serve. This is a devastation thing. Devastating families, probably almost as anything else that you can imagine. Relationships, trust, commitment, family and friends. And we even see this, how this is affecting young people in the form of their games with mystery boxes and loot boxes. These are parts of the game where you have to pay to get maybe a better weapon, a better skin, but you're not guaranteed for that. You don't know what you're going to get. So 10-year-olds are gambling, paying real money to get maybe the best weapon, when maybe I get a stick, right? It's gambling, it's conditioned gambling in video games. And this is in Hot Wheels, this is in Star Wars games, FIFA. I mean, what's it doing in there, right? So it's just conditioning kids, right? Right before kickoff, what do? They talk about the spread, right? And most of us here, right, can manage these things. But think about people who are vulnerable to this, especially if I have a mental health issue, how more susceptible I am. And then young people, right, we know the science, their prefrontal cortex is not developed. That's that rational, logical, moral brain is not fully developed until they're about 25 or 26 years old. So young people are very vulnerable to this. So I just wanted to share my experiences with the people that I serve as a therapist and working in this field for the 42 years I've been in this field. And wish you could roll back the clock. And, as the governor said last week, yeah, it was a mistake. And I think, we should commend for people who say, you know what, I made a mistake. A lot of times we don't want to admit when we're wrong nowadays. I don't know why that is, but that seems to be our general culture. But it's good and refreshing to see when we do something wrong, we can correct it. We don't have to continue to do the bad thing, to do the thing that's not healthy. We can make changes and we can make our state a better place to live in. Thank you.